We went to Governor's Isle for to stand for instant cannon in true military style. 17 American dollars each month we surely get for to carry a gun and bang it with a military stare.
Hello, I'm Sam Arnold, and welcome back to FryingPans West. We've got a fun show for you tonight. We took a camera crew up to South Dakota to Rosebud Indian Reservation and got some interesting footage which we're going to be showing in just a moment. I brought this along in case you'd never seen one before. This is called a string of prairie turnips. And prairie turnips are found usually just about in Sioux country in South Dakota. The Sioux dig these up, and we'll show you what the plant looks like a little bit later. If any of you have the privilege of having a good Sioux dinner with some Washtunkala in it, Washtunkala being a stew that they make with prairie turnips and jerky and potatoes, other types of vegetables, you'll find that these things are floating around chopped up in the middle of them. Well, the Sioux gather these, and they're an underground pod or an underground thing like a turnip, and they taste rather like a potato until they're dried. Then after they're dried, they're just hard as if they're made of wood. The flavor of them also alters. They get a little bit more of a turnipy taste, and they're quite pithy. When you chew them, why, you really know that you've had something to eat. These make a very nice decorative string, and we're going to now show you the film up in South Dakota that we took at Rosebud Indian Reservation. We called a friend of ours by the name of Bruce Prettybird, who works for the Rosebud-Sioux, and Bruce arranged for a group of his friends and relatives to take us out and show us some of the different cooking techniques. Now, here we are looking for the prairie turnip itself, and we went out on a tall a long field on the top of a high hill, and a gentleman by the name of IronShell, who is an old Rosebud-Sioux of the old style people, he found this little plant. And now they don't grow in clusters, they go rather individually, one here, one 20, 30 feet away, and you have to really have sharp eyes to spot that little flower. Then you dig them up with a mattox, and there is the bulb on the bottom. Here he goes getting another one up. You see, you have to really be sharp to see the flower on the top. And they're pretty good eating, even just out of the ground. They have kind of a radishy consistency, and they're about 2-3 inches long. You get some big ones, but most of them are long, narrow ones. We went hunting for some berries, too, and found some choke cherries and some wild blackberries. The choke cherries, a lot of the Sioux today freeze in their freezers, and then they use them during the year. The old style is to dry them. This is some wild mint that we picked up. It has a real nice flavor to it. Now, this is IronShell. Carl, I believe, is in his 70s, and he's the grandson of a very famous Indian chief who was with Crazy Horse. There's some berries. Actually, the hills around in that area of South Dakota are just filled with berries and things that you can eat. Now, here is some jerky. And then we're putting the jerky into some boiling water. A group of ladies, friends of Bruce's, took us out, and we were building a big fire out on the top of a hill, and they had a jar full of the prairie turnips. Now, they had soaked these for a couple of days so that they were now soft. Still chewy, though. And they put a whole bunch of those inside the kettle, along with some dried deer jerky. That's sun-dried meat. Now they're going to make some Indian bread. And they just do this by hand, just by eye. They look and see how much they need, and they throw some big block of lard onto a skillet in the fire, and that will melt down. And this is to make their fried bread. They take a handful of baking powder, throw it into the flour, and it's all just done without any measuring tools at all. The hand is the measuring tool. Here goes a little salt, and it always comes out just right because they've made it so many times that they don't need measuring cups. They just know exactly how much. Throw in some milk, and it's just salt, flour, baking powder, and milk. I guess you can figure from the angle of the milk there that it's somewhere in the vicinity of about a half a quart of milk so far. They stir it around. It was pretty good eating, and I really enjoyed it. Now, see, there's the dough that's rolled out. There's a piece of jerky from the stew. This stew is called Washtunkala. Now we're back to the fried bread. Traditionally, you cut it into squares, and then you cut a couple little slits right in the center, 1 or 2 slits right in the center, and that seems to allow the fat to go into it, and it fries better. You just drop this dough into the hot fat and hot lard, and out it comes. It's sort of like sopapillas, and I'm not certain that perhaps the Sioux got this idea of fried bread from the contact with the early Mexican traders. I can't establish that, of course, but there is no history of Sioux bread of this sort being pre-contact with either the Americans coming west, the people from New England, or possibly the Mexican traders. Since, with the exception of the crullers and the fried breads of that sort of the Pennsylvania Germans, I don't know of fried bread being used in colonial America. So I suspect that possibly some Mexicans came up, as there was a great deal of trade up into the Missouri, Mississippi Valley, and up in the Missouri from the Mexicans in early days. Now these little discs that she's put down onto a rock are dried choke cherry discs. They gather the choke cherries and squash them down and then sun dry them. You take the dried disc and put it on a rock when you're ready to make what they call wojapi, W-O-J-A-P-I. And they use a stone mallet, and you pound the choke cherries with the mallet until it becomes a fine pulverized mess. You do that onto a skin, and then drop the choke cherries, and it has a lot of seeds in it. It really gets in your teeth and is something else, but it has a very fine flavor. And this is a type of a dessert. This is one of the most popular of the Sioux Indian desserts. And you simply add water to these dried choke cherries and sugar, and then they'll put in some flour to thicken it. And that sounds like it's just paste, but it really is most delicious. And I'll show you how to make a version of white man's wojapi later. Here comes some of the Washtunkala, the jerky along with corn. Now this is dried corn on the cob that they have soaked to reconstitute it, and it's absolutely almost identical to corn that we have when it's fresh. Now she's dropping in to the wojapi, that's the choke cherry material, flour and water along with sugar, and that is what it is. Now when that's cooked, it makes a sort of a thin custard. The flour thickens it up. See, there it goes, and it doesn't lump up, and it makes a sweet dessert. You can serve it either cold or hot. And that's the way they serve it, in little bowls. Everybody eats it, and you crunch down on it with your teeth on those seeds, and it really is something wild to eat. good for you. I'm sure it has a roughage effect on the inside. This hat might be of interest to you. This is an 1830 period beaver hat. And there are not very many of these in existence. I'm kind of a collector of hats, and I really love them. This was made at the time when the beaver trade was right at its height. It's a blonde. I think that they probably bleached the beaver fur, and then they, having made a felt inside, and that, you know, felt is made of hair, fur, and then they put the glue on it and put this flocking of the beaver, and it's so nice and smooth. Wish they made these today. Now, we're going to show you two different dishes. One that is the wojapi, and this is a version that you can make yourself at home. And the other one is a New Mexican or Mexican dish. It's called a Swiss enchilada. I know that sounds kind of strange because enchiladas in Switzerland are pretty far removed, but in Mexico, when they use any dairy products, because Switzerland is such a dairy country, the Mexicans say that the item is a Swiss item. In other words, a Swiss enchilada is one that has dairy products in it. And that's where the similarity to Swiss food ends. To make that, best thing to do is to take a big casserole. And this is an assembly job. And you take some butter and butter the inside of the casserole. I'm going to, this butter has been melting under the lights here. It's a little goopy. There we go. And just sort of mash it, slosh it around. But get all of your Mexican casserole covered with the butter. And then you'll take corn tortillas. You can buy these in almost every supermarket around the country these days. Don't get the flour ones, the wheat flour ones, and lay in a bed of corn tortillas. And you can teach your children this one because it's very easy to do. Then take whatever you want as your meat, and I use chicken, turkey. I've made shrimp ones and lobster ones. What I did was get some pieces of cooked chicken. I just bought one of those chickens that they cook at the supermarkets and cut the meat into bite-sized pieces. Use the skin and all if you like the skin. That's one of my favorite parts. And then grab a handful of this and layer it around inside the, just a little bit here and there. And then the next thing, take some green chili pods. And I've got about 4 or 5 here. You can get these in various degrees of heat and pepper hotness, and throw this across the top. Don't use all of it because you're going to need to make another layer. This thing is sort of like a lasagna and goes up in layers. And then I grated some Longhorn cheese. You know, you can use any good sharp cheddar, which is Longhorn, and make a layer of that. Use about half your cheese on your first layer. And then take some finely sliced onion and throw pieces of it here and there all over the thing. This is a great dish, and it turns out sort of like almost a custard. And then take some sour cream. If you're making a great big one of these, why, the best thing to do is to heat sour cream and a quart of cream on the fire, and then add salt. This is monosodium glutamate here, and about a teaspoon of that across the top. And then This is Monterey Jack cheese. It's white. If you don't have that, and strangely enough, in some of the grocery stores you can't find Monterey Jack cheese. Use mozzarella in its place if you can't find it. Salt, and then let's see, we've got to add a little bit of cream across the top. That will boil and come up. Now we cover this up and make another layer. And we'll take and repeat the same process. Layer the chicken over. You can chop, as I say, chop shrimp. You can use pork pieces, barbecue pieces, you name it, whatever you like to have. And again, now add cheese. And when that cheese melts in the oven, it is really wild. It's a good dish. And throw on some more onion. And sour cream, dot it here and there, the sour cream. And more of the Monterey Jack. There we go. Take butter and dot it here and there. Sort of spread it across the top. Add a little bit of oregano for an herb, and finish up with the rest of the green chili in it. And a final layer of tortillas across the top. And you can add cheese to these layered across with a little bit of the remainder of your Longhorn cheese. And you want this to be fairly moist on the inside, and so depending again upon the size of your casserole, add half and half or cream or a fairly rich milk to the top of it. Now that cheese is going to melt on those tortillas and it gets in the oven. All of the cheeses on the inside will start to melt and will really taste great. Now, let's see, let's just dot this with a few pieces of chopped pimento. I hope that you have a color set because this is a colorful dish. And there she is and ready to go in the oven. And you put it into a fairly fast oven and let it 475 and let it sit in there about 35 or 40 minutes until it is really piping hot. You may have to add moisture to it by adding some more milk, but be sure that the thing doesn't get really dry. It should be almost soupy. The corn tortillas will tend to break down with the moisture and the steam, and it gives almost like a tamale effect all the way through, but it's layered with cheeses and chilies and the onion. the onion cooks so it doesn't end up as being raw onion. Now, I thought I would show you what I call in the cookbook white man's wojapi, and it's a variant of the one that you saw made up in Rosebud. And the easy way to do this is to take yourself either canned or, as these are frozen blackberries, and let them thaw out and drop them in to a big pot. And that's about I guess that's about a 2-pound amount. It's one of those big sacks of frozen ones that they have in the supermarkets. And then 2 cups of sugar, because they're quite tart, the blackberries are. If you can get choke cherries, why, of course, that's the real thing to use. But choke cherries have an awful lot of seeds inside of them, and they're not so easy to eat as the blackberries. Then turn your fire on underneath it and take a, so I'll move this stuff over here. Take a lemon and grate the peel of this thing so that you get some you want to kind of go around the whole lemon and get as much of that tart peel as you can. That adds a nice flavor to your wojapi. We used to make this in the restaurant by using nuts in it too. We'd take hazelnuts or pecan bits. And then we'll just drop this little bit of lemon peel in with it. The oil from that lemon peel will give it a real fine flavor. Let's see now. I think I better get a spoon to stir that with. Now I just have the juice of it now, and I'm going to need more water. So you want this to boil up and be fairly thin, because your flour is going to thicken it anyway, and this will give you more quantity and plenty of flavor. I've got about 2 cups of water into that. Now, it's a good idea if you have this kind of flour that will mix readily into liquids without balling up and becoming a lumpy gravy. Why, the best thing to do is to take your flour and add it to cold water. I'm sure you know that, into a cup of cold water, and dissolve it and get all of the lumps out of it. But if you have that kind of flour that has the very fine granules that dissolve right away and don't lump up, well, you can add this in any time. I know it sounds kind of wooky to have flour and water, but when it thickens up, it becomes kind of a clear, thin gelatin, or a gelatinous appearing thing. I think I'd add some more lemon peel to that. I was doing this one day, showing the white man version of wojapi to an Indian friend, and the Indian friend smiled very gently while I did this and said, "Well, yeah, I suppose you could do it that way. It isn't the real way." We showed you the real way. If you want to pound your own choke cherries, well, you get the real thing. Okay, let's take a look in the oven at the enchilada. It won't be ready because it needs really about 35-40 minutes more, but I had the oven good and hot when I put it in, and it'll give you an idea of how the thing is just even beginning to look with the cheese all melting across the top of it. When you cut into that, or the very top tortillas will be quite crisp. You see, this is beginning to crisp up. And they'll be all nice and crispy like a crisp tostada with the cheese on it and then the green chili and all of that melted goop on the inside. And it is really delicious. Now, I wanted to show you the cookbook that we have done. This has recipes from the whole series. It's called FryingPans West, and the station will explain to you how you can get one of these if you care to have one. This has both food and drink recipes of the early West, of the settlers who were coming out from different kinds of groups. For example, the Mormons and the New Englanders, some of the southern recipes like Hopping John that they used to serve New Year's Day and became a Western dish known in the West, although it originated in the South. We have a recipe for a great salad dressing called Monticello dressing. It came from Thomas Jefferson, and it was used with sesame oil, which he was trying to develop in place of olive oil, which was too expensive in those days. At any rate, you'll learn how to get this book from the station, and I want to thank you for being with us here. Do try the enchilada. It's a really good dish, and experiment with different things with it. Try shrimp, try lobster, try beef, sausage, any sort of combination that you might like. The wojapi is a good thing that you can not only serve for dessert, but you can keep it in the icebox, and when the kids come home from school, why, they can dip into that, and it's full of good vitamins, good things that they can enjoy. Next week, we'll be back with another show. We're trying to get a combination of Indian foods as well as the early foods of the people who came west. If you have any recipes or old recipe books that date back to the first half of the 19th century, I'd certainly be much obliged if you'd contact the station and let me know just how I might be able to take a look at them. Thanks very much for being with me. Good night.
We went to Governor's Isle for to stand for instant cannon in true military style. 17 American dollars each month we surely get for to carry a gun and bang it with a military step. We had a choice of going to the army or to jail, or it's up the Hudson River with the copper take a sail. Oh, we mustered up our courage and with bravery we did go.